So thank you all. Now on to introductions. So Stuart studied fine art printmaking at Gray's School of Art in Aberdeen and has a long-standing involvement with the Glasgow Print Studio, where he is currently the studio etching master, working mostly with etching, mezzotint, digital printmaking, and oil painting. You may be familiar with his work as a result of his notable show at the Compass Gallery, Gerber Fine Arts Center in Glasgow in 2019. Tonight, Stuart will be reflecting on his Jerusalem-based art created from 1996 to 2020. Stuart traveled to Israel in '96 to work at the Jerusalem Print Workshop and has been going back regularly ever since. His art reflects his understanding of the city, religious conflict, and the resolution found in his art. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to artist Stuart Duffin.
Well, that was my cue, I think. Thanks, Ruby. Yep, excellent. Welcome to tonight's lecture, and welcome to my studio up here, my home studio in the northeast of Scotland. Well, one of my studios anyway. Actually, it's looking a bit tidy. I was trying to mess it up earlier on to make it look more kind of realistic, but seriously failed them. If you've logged on tonight, presumably it's because you may be asking what makes an artist tick? What makes this artist tick? We'll come back to that in a minute or two, but maybe I thought, for those that don't know me so well, I thought I could maybe relate to you the answers to a few questions I was asked to answer for a 20 questions type of interview for International Arts Manager magazine a few years ago. And the questions, they kind of went like this. First question was name, well, Stuart Duffin. That was the easy one, wasn't it? Age, 57 almost at time of publishing in June 2016, so work it out for yourself. Occupation, artist, printmaker, painter, and educator. Most important tool is my collection of antique mezzotint rockers, and in conjunction with my razor sharp scrapers and my coffee pot, absolutely vital. Artists are cultural figures who have most influenced you. The classical music of Scots composer Malcolm Lindsay has always been influential on my work and my state of mind while working. But other than that, I am less influenced by artists and more by environments, places, circumstances, and experiences. Where are you based? I'm split 3 ways between my home studio in the northeast of Scotland here, the Glasgow Print Studio, GPS, and the Jerusalem Print Workshop, JPW. Favorite app is any app that can order pizza with. Favorite movie of the year? All-time favorite movie would be anything by Jacques Tati, or Amélie perhaps, with Audrey Tautou, because it owes a lot to Tati's legacy. The book on your bedside table, Strange Things Happen, the drummer Stuart Copeland's autobiography. He's a talented and very humorous storyteller. Also, The Great Partnership by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Your work in 3 words: shalom, salam, peace, alternatively, forgiveness, compassion, coexistence. Emerging talent to watch out for. I think any emerging talent that's a visual artist who's willing to learn how to draw in any form or style should be given due credit. They can then turn to whatever they want with genuine authority. Biggest challenge to date, it has to be staying sane and at peace in the midst of this manic world, and perhaps not using that pizza app too often. Proudest moment, any moment that I remember. I am the dad of a doctor, my daughter, and an architect, my son. Next big thing, World War III. Where would you like to be in 10 years' time? Still out running on a darkening, rainy evening. Bliss. And the final question, what would you say to your younger self? Remember, son, growing old is mandatory, but growing up, that's optional. So you might ask, what makes an artist tick? I might ask, how come I often end up doing residencies in a conflict zone of some sort? Elizabeth Mahoney, when she was reviewing my 2001 solo exhibition at the Glasgow Print Studio, said, you get the strong sense that Duffin is attracted to places in conflict, irrevocably shaped by it. And she had a point. Firstly, a 2-month residency in Moscow during the collapse of communism in both the Balkans and Mother Russia too. That was also during the period of the Gorbachev overthrow, and of course the breakup of Yugoslavia, the Croat, Bosnian, Serb war, with which I had direct and personal contact. And I was first in Jerusalem around 96 at the time of Yitzhak Rabin's assassination, at the tail end of the first Intifada, and again for my first solo exhibition a couple of years later in 1998, and then Belfast, post-Good Friday Agreement, fortunately, but where not far from my digs, I discovered Jerusalem Street, alongside Damascus Street, Cairo Street, Palestine Street, in a place called the Holy Lands in Belfast. I wonder why, eh? And then it was back to Jerusalem Print Workshop on 4 more residencies in the last 7 years. Well, as I've already said, my art is perhaps less influenced by other artists and more by environments, places, circumstances, and experiences. And the way that my early experiences in Jerusalem in particular have shaped my work as an artist is in fact one of the things that I've been asked to talk to you about this evening. I have many varied and mixed experiences in Jerusalem, such as the time in 1996 when there was a loud bang in the middle of the day, in the middle of the street, and I was standing outside Stamatsky's bookshop looking in the window in central West Jerusalem, and I was about to walk inside, and suddenly all I saw was people scattering, pigeons taking flight. Within a few seconds, with the realization that it wasn't actually a bomb going off, but a car backfiring, life resumed its usual hectic pace, and I simply walked off. Soon, however, a colleague of mine from the Jerusalem Print Workshop wasn't going to be quite so lucky. Or the time, a couple of years later, of the incident of the bomb under the workshop floorboards. One day back home in Glasgow, I had a call from the founder and director of the workshop, Arik Kalemnik. He's now a good friend of mine. And he phoned me just to have a chat. And I said to him that I had used the Street of Prophets road sign. There he is, you can see it at the top of this piece of work. It's a beautiful ceramic street sign at the foot of the stairs leading up to the workshop. And I'd used it in this new piece of work, and I said I'd send him a photograph of it. And he said to me, well, you better send it quick before they blow it up. Yeah, what? So when I inquired what he meant, he explained that he had actually found a whole suitcase full of Semtex linked to a mobile phone. The ringing of the phone would produce the charge that was going to detonate this explosion, and it was crammed up against the back door of the gallery on the ground floor. And right enough, I remember reading about that in the Jerusalem Post online a day before. The guy who found it was hailed as a hero for yanking the wires out to defuse it seconds before the phone rang in his hands. The inside story, according to my friend Arik, anyway, was that actually the guy was just trying to steal the mobile phone. Hero by default, or perhaps it's got something to do with Arik's phenomenal storytelling skills. But let's go back to the first residency in 1996 when I was invited to work at Jerusalem Print Workshop as part of an international exchange programme with the Glasgow Print Studio, the GPS. And the British Council in Tel Aviv were organising this, but they were actually on the verge of cancelling it due to safety concerns. But I went anyway. Wasn't it dangerous? People back home would ask me later. Nah, I'd answer, because one of the first things I did there was to buy an international newspaper. It was the UK's Times broadsheet, and the front page of the headline on the Times was IRA bomb plot foiled. So here I am, sitting in Jerusalem, reading about bomb plots back home, and then other folks back home and saying to me, no problems, I hope. Well, I reply, apart from 2 bus bombs, 1 hotel room destroyed, a premature suicide bombing, found in an empty soccer park, and a shooting at Damascus Gate. Nah, no real problems. I just missed all that. So these and other incidents and experiences then started to have a significant influence on my art. From 1996 till about 2001, all of my work had been concerned with the city of Jerusalem and with the burden of historical and contemporary baggage that it bears. And strangely enough, it's also a development in many respects of my previous work based on my experiences. I suppose witnessing the legacy left behind by the collapse of communism in Russia and the Balkans while I was resident at the printmaker's workshop in Sinyazh near Moscow. For me, for many, Jerusalem is the closest that we can get to heaven of our own accord. But nowhere more than in Jerusalem did I experience our separation from the divine and from our own humanity in such a painfully obvious way. In Jerusalem, my own sense of this loss is a loss of researching that I believe still lies deep within the makeup of each and every one of us, and it was brought sharply into focus. It's a loss which I believe may manifest itself in the creative or expressive arts, or in negative addictions, cravings, depression, in spiritual searching or religious fanaticism, in acts of compassion or acts of violence. And although Jerusalem has become the foundation for much of my work over the last quarter of a century now, I always make it quite clear that it is not about Jerusalem. There are constant references to Jerusalem in my work, and this is really because I see the welfare of the city today and throughout history almost like a barometer, an indicator of the well-being of our own humanity, not just as individuals, but collectively, globally, as a society, indeed, perhaps even as a civilization. It was while I was in Jerusalem, by the way, that I also became intrigued by the ancient principles of map making. The more important a place is, the larger it will appear on the map and the closer it is to the center. And that's an approach that was also adopted by the icon painters of the Byzantine and Renaissance eras. Geographical reality is less of a consideration than spiritual significance. And this is what I refer to as the sacred science. It's a phrase I coined to try to help me understand this. And here in this particular etching from 1987, it's called Lamentations of Jeremiah. And we have an old wood engraving of Jerusalem, which I placed at the center of the world. And this, in fact, a geographical and meteorological reality, which is possibly closer to actual fact than we actually think, than we realize. And we can also see a little Babylon at the top right, and a tiny little Egyptian pyramids towards the bottom left. Here's another etching from the same period called To Lament Both Exile and Return, which has Bruegel's amazing Tower of Babel bang in the center. And for me, this represents Babylon and the exile as the center of this world. It's also interesting to note here that the little map of Jerusalem, you can see it off to the lower left. And when I was making this etches, I spent ages drawing the Tower of Babel in the center of the plate. I had lots of fun doing so. But with the little Jerusalem image, I wanted to retain the kind of antique wood engraved quality of the original book illustration, the source that I was taking it from. I could have redrawn this little wood engraving of Jerusalem, but I think it would have lost something. So I decided to etch it onto the plate using a photo transfer process. However, it went wrong. Technically, it didn't all transfer, and the result was a somewhat destroyed looking Jerusalem. Relevant? Bearing in mind the opening words of Jeremiah's Lamentations. The technical processes of any creative art, such as etching, things can and do go wrong, even for someone considered a master etcher like myself. Frequently frustrating at the time, they can actually be a good thing for those who are able to seize the opportunity and run with it. And years ago, a student of mine put it very succinctly when he said, Stuart, you can plan an etching, A followed by B followed by C, and you have your etching at the end of it. But, he then said, when something goes wrong and makes you do something about it, that's when the whole process can start to sparkle. In general, I've never any trouble talking about my work as an artist. Artists quite often fall into one of two groups regarding this matter. There are those that hate doing it and those who revel in it. And as the Duffin family are all performers and musicians, I definitely fall into the latter category. Moving on a little bit, at the start of 2001, I was asked to prepare new work for a solo show at the GPS Glasgow Print Studio for September that year in 2001. And that's very short notice for me, as my work is by nature very slow to produce. So for the next several months, I worked flat out, finishing one piece only to put it immediately aside and start on the next. And I only saw the whole complete body of 30 or more works together for the first time when it arrived in the gallery from the framers on the Monday morning of the week leading up to the opening on September the 1st, 2001. And when I laid the work out around the walls, I suddenly felt very, very shaken for reasons I couldn't quite fathom. So much so that someone actually asked me, "Are you okay, Stuart?" And I said, "Yeah, I must just be nervous about the opening." "You, Stuart, nervous?" "Nah, never. I mean, I'm the guy that enjoyed his driving test, by the way. So nervous, it doesn't usually happen for me, but something really spooked me. During the week I was hiring this show, one evening I smelled burning, smoke. And I thought, oh dear, someone set the bins alight again through in the back lane at the Glasgow Print Studio. And I went down to check, nothing. It happened again much later that same evening, and I checked the entire building, inside and out. Nothing. And then a few days later, following the opening of the show, with the work on the walls on September the 11th, 2001, 9/11. Almost immediately after that world-changing event, the CIA accused the then little-known terrorist Osama bin Laden of the atrocity. And he didn't deny it, but neither did he accept responsibility. He simply said, "There will be no rest until Palestine is free." Jerusalem, like this etching here, you can see, suddenly finds herself center stage in the world yet again. And I still find it a little bit difficult to talk about this period of work in some ways. So instead, I'll let Elizabeth Mahoney, who I mentioned earlier, reviewed the show in the UK press, and let her do it for me. She wrote, "Given the events in New York last week, Stuart Duffin's exhibition has a terrible timeliness about it. Several of the works, a time bomb in the form of a miniature planet Earth has just been lit. Already prescient thanks to continued instability in the Middle East, this exhibition of work inspired by trips to Jerusalem takes on a deadly accuracy. The world he depicts in these mezzotins, etchings, and paintings is one in deep conflict, on the brink of chaos from which there may be no turning back. In the painting, a sense of innocence lost, and you can see it here, bathed the city wall in blood red. A time bomb glowers above screeds of graffiti. It's a cold, brutal painting, devoid of the tinge of hope that lingers in other works. Actually, I thought it was more of a kind of friendly sunset sort of red, but there you go, Stuart. You can't get them all right all the time. Though these are difficult works, they are not without hope, hence the fragile promise, she said, of the eggshells. What they seem to speak of is being balanced on a precipice, an historical and political moment which might move towards apocalypse or some form of resolution. This is work that feels like now and speaks to us about a new world order. And this is where she said you get the strong sense that Duffin is attracted to places in conflict, irrevocably shaped by it. A few minutes ago, I said it was a loss which I believe can manifest itself in acts of compassion or violence, all present in everyday Jerusalem and every society, everywhere, worldwide. But look, let's get positive here. There was a gap of almost 15 years from 1998 while I was trying to get back to Jerusalem in JPW. And we need to put those early works in context alongside more recent work. And I've made this since I started returning to Jerusalem in 2012. If over the millennia we have suffered such a loss deep within the makeup of each one of us, then in Jerusalem in 2012, I feel I have found something which now speaks to me in quite a profound way. What did I find? Well, after I got home from JPW in 2012, I wrote this in my blog. Being back in Jerusalem in August and September was both very challenging and very informative. It'll take a while for it to manifest itself in any future works. In the meanwhile, all I can say is that I hope that my immediate and ongoing response will be a compassionate one. Compassion, one of the first of two words that will come to govern my responses, either at home in Scotland or Jerusalem. Compassion, a willingness to put someone else's well-being on a par with my own, perhaps with even some sacrifice on my part. It's a recognition that everyone has the right to basic human dignity, and it challenges my willingness to offer it, regardless of whether I see it as deserved or not. So in conclusion, then, I'd like to leave you with the words of an old negotiator's maxim that has as its starting point, there is probably more that unites us than divides us. Unites us, coexistence, which is the second of my two words. If in my earlier work from Jerusalem, I was trying to understand the complex issues of conflict in the Middle East and throughout the world, then in my work from 2012 onwards, I am discovering the dual theme of conflict and resolution. And that's why I called my recent solo exhibition at the Royal Scottish Academy of Art and Architecture in Edinburgh last November, Peace Starts with a Smile. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what my art is all about. I'll hand you back to Ruby in a minute, but just before I do so, I'd just like to say thank you very much. You have been a fantastic audience.